Welcome to part 1 of Unit 6, Access Control. We'll go through about the first half of this in this video, and I'll do a second video for the second half. Objectives. Upon completion of this section, the student, without reference to notes, will be able to identify the basic elements of access control and identification to include visual recognition, written documentation, third-party authorization, security escort. Define threat potential. Identify definitions of the following terms: espionage, sabotage, terrorism. Identify 3 types of access control. The control of access is a primary concern to security guards. Security guards must remain vigilant, and they must manage access. The control of access to and within a facility is of primary concern in the prevention of crime and in the control of loss due to theft and injury. The security of any facility relies heavily on the restriction and control of traffic, both vehicular and pedestrian, into and out of the physical location, as well as within the confines of the buildings. There are a number of means to achieve access control at the basic level, as well as at a higher level through both physical and procedural means. Effective access control is in the hands of the security guard, who is charged with the responsibility. A thorough knowledge of employer or client policies, desires, and expectations relating to access control is essential. No system, policy, procedure, or equipment will be an effective tool unless the individual security guard remains vigilant, informed, and aware of their surroundings and the employer-client's expectations. The purpose of this lesson is to make the security guard aware of how access control can be used to the benefit of the company in the reduction of loss. Additionally, it will highlight some of the tools and skills required to effectively manage the security of the facility. And in case you're still not clear on access, what do we mean by access control? It means who gets in and who doesn't. Who gets into the property in general, who is allowed into particular buildings, who's not, who's allowed into particular offices, who's not. That's the kind of thing we're talking about with access control. And we're going to be talking about not only employees of the company, but visitors as well. Elements of access control and identification: visual recognition, written documentation, which can include visitor badges. The badges should be secure and not vulnerable to theft or duplication. Vendor identification, work orders. Visual, and this is really important, guys, visual recognition, also referred to as personal knowledge, is widely used but is generally considered to be the least reliable means of identification. I wish I had highlighted this in the notes. Least reliable means of identification. It is a dangerous practice to grant access based on whether the security guard is familiar with the individual and or knows that the person is an employee. Familiarity of the security guard with persons and vehicles entering and leaving the property may result in the security guard becoming complacent, that kind of means lazy, and failing to properly check identification prior to allowing access to the property. An effective security guard will always ask for identification from all persons, if required in their post orders, and will be familiar with the facility's hours of operation and level of access granted to each employee. Additionally, to assist the security guard in making determinations regarding the granting of access, each post should have a current list of any terminations, that means people who got fired, new hires, etc., as well as vendors and contractors affecting their post. So before I move on, visual recognition is when you know somebody, you know who they are. If you're going to work in the same place day after day, week after week, month after month, you become very familiar with the regular people there, the employees. You probably see some of the same people every single day. You know who they are. You know what they look like. Yet, this is saying, despite that, despite the fact that you know who they are, you know what they look like, you know, whatever, who they are in the company, that is not enough to grant them access to a particular area. And my question, and we can talk about this in our next meeting, is why? Why is that not a good way to do it? Why is that not okay? And why is that least reliable? So I'll give you, the hint. There's a hint down here. So we'll see what you guys come up with next time we talk. So we're still talking about elements of access control. So the first one was visual recognition, and now we're going to talk about written documentation, and that includes identification cards and documents. So there's delivery employee photo badges, delivery manifests, that just basically means paperwork, delivery paperwork. You could request the person to produce additional identification in his or her name. And if it's during business hours, contact a supervisor in the area for which the person is requesting access. Written documentation. There are a number of written documents which can be used by the security guard in an effort to control and monitor access to and within the facility. Employee photo badges, visitor badges. The badges should be secure and not vulnerable to theft or duplication. Vendor identification. A vendor is a salesperson. Work orders, delivery manifests. Any written documentation that the security guard has at his or her disposal should be used in making the determination as to whether to grant access to the facility or to a specific area within the facility. So let me pause here. So think about some big company, right? Well, they have their own employees that go there every day to work. That would be number one. They should all have, employee badges. But then you have people who come, potential customers, and or other types of people. They're going to be visitors. So where these people get to go and where they don't get to go is going to be different. Then you have vendor ID. Well, a company is going to need to buy supplies and materials to continue to run their company. So that's what a vendor might come to the company to sell. Let's just say paper products, for example. I mean, every office needs paper. So their salesman comes to the property. They should have the proper company identification, vendor identification. Work orders. So let's say something breaks and you need to hire an outside contractor like a plumber or an electrician. They need to come and fix something. That's going to require a work order. And so all of these documents should match. The person's name should match that which is on the paperwork. That's the kind of idea that we have going here. And then delivery manifest. So this vendor, this paper vendor that I used as an example, the salesman came and showed you his products and gave you his prices and convinced you that he was a good person to do business with and buy paper from. So you put an order in for the paper. Well, here it comes. That's what this next visitor to the property is going to be, the actual delivery person delivering the product. And that would have this type of paperwork, a delivery manifest. So it's up to the security guard to check and double check all of these things and make sure they all square up, match up, and you can always check with your supervisor or other supervisors at the company, at the facility, to verify that these are legitimate people and they should be there. And so here's just a picture of some of those documents. I know this one's probably hard to read. Oh, there we go. What one is this? This looks like a delivery manifest, because we have a listing of products that's being delivered, who it's from, who it's to, who ordered it, that kind of thing. This is, and I'm in the way here, but this is a photo ID, not necessarily of an employee, but of a salesperson. You know, this person, Karen, she says she's with this company, and there's her face. So do they match? Does that look legit? Employee photo badges, for example. You know, you've got the picture, you've got the name, and then over here is an example of a work order where paperwork is filled out that we need. I can't really read that, but you get the idea. You know, you need something fixed or something done, and here's the paperwork for that. So these are the kinds of things you want to check and be critical of. And I can't get this to go back. There we go. You know, just be critical and be attention to detail. You know, certainly in today's technology world, it's easy enough to forge papers. So you just want to double, triple, quadruple check if need be. Written documentation should be viewed in a whole picture perspective. For example, a person who claims to be a contractor would present identification attesting to their company. Additionally, the security guard could check for a permit issued by the employer client. And finally, the security guard could check for a valid work order or delivery manifest to make the final verification as to the validity of the visitor. These items should be examined closely for signs of tampering or alterations. If the security guard has a question about the validity of the identification documents presented, the guard should request the person to produce additional ID in his or her name. And maybe this part of the curriculum sounds like a little paranoid. Trust me, it's not. Go back to when we talked about these highly competitive industries. You cannot underestimate what the competitor might be willing to do. So you got to take this stuff really serious. So we're still talking about written documentation. If it's after business hours, contact the designated area or facility official for clearance. So you have a lot of companies that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but business hours, those are Monday through Friday, typically 8 to 4, 8 to 5, 9 to 5. Those are business hours. So somebody might come after that 5 o'clock time and the front office people have gone home. That doesn't mean that there aren't other people in the company working that you could contact. And that's what this is talking about. Sorry, I'm always in the way. If during business hours, contact a supervisor in the area where the person is requesting access to. If after business hours, contact the designated area or facility official for clearance. If the person is a vendor or delivery service, contact the delivery company to verify the identity of the person at the site and the contents of the package if known. So this is like where you're doing a reverse check rather than, you should do both. Contact somebody in the area where they're saying they need to go and see if the supervisor over there is expecting them or knows anything about it. But then you can also contact the company that the vendor works for, that they say they work for. Hey, we got one of your salesmen here, John Smith. he says he's here to deliver such and such, or, and the company on the other end of the phone, they should be able to verify that. If they can't, if they're like, we never heard of that guy, oh, you got problems. So if there is any doubt as to the purpose of the visit and its validity, and the guard is unable to confirm or verify, security guards should feel comfortable in refusing admittance until or unless clearance is granted by a supervisor or other responsible person. Unless employer-client policy specifies otherwise, security guards should not accept deliveries intended for other employees. If the delivery company is unable to complete delivery, an attempt should be made at a later time. So, there's a bunch of things in here. First of all, that's what's so great about having a supervisor. You can push the hard stuff off on them. You know what? Let me call my supervisor. Let them make the decision. Then it's out of your hands and you don't have to worry about it. This last part here about don't accept deliveries for somebody else, because then it opens up too many possibilities of, well, that isn't what I ordered. Why did you accept that? I didn't want that. Or I never got it. Well, I gave it to the security guard. No, he didn't. It just, if this is going to a specific person, that person needs to get it, not me. That's the idea here. So, third-party authorization. Issuance of a written order which is forwarded to security detailing the date and time of the visitor. So this is kind of like they're letting you know ahead of time, hey, I'm supposed to have a visitor. Here's who it is. Here's why they're coming. The security guard verifies the visitor's ID by contacting the employee whom the party wishes to visit and receives verbal clearance. Security procedures require that an employee report to the security post and personally escort the visitor to the designated area. The employee at that time or at that point assumes responsibility for the visitor. And this can actually be done a few different ways. There's no hard and fast rule here. It's really each company and what they want to do. But the main idea is you don't just point and go, oh yeah, you don't just tell a visitor, just go down 2 buildings, take a right, and the door is right there. And then you got somebody walking around unsupervised throughout your facility. Or, 3rd floor, second hallway, there it is. You have no idea where they actually might end up. And they might end up in a place they're not supposed to be. That's first of all. Second of all, what if they get hurt? What if they trip and fall on something, because they're whatever? And you don't let people walk around your company unescorted. Who does the escorting? That's up to your company. It might be you as a security guard. So-and-so comes up to your desk. I'm here to see, the supervisor. You call the supervisor. John Smith's here. Yep. Can you bring him over? I'm waiting on him. Okay, let's go. And you walk them. And you escort them to where they need to go. Or you call your supervisor and say, Bob Smith's here to see you. Yep, I'll be right down. And then the employee comes down and escorts their visitor to where they need to go. Either way works. As long as that visitor is not walking around unescorted through your property. So elements of access control and identification, security escort. So I just discussed that. And then we have login procedures where you make people sign in. Why do we do that? Accountability, awareness. So you know who's on property and who isn't. God forbid there's an emergency where you have to call the fire department. The first question fire department wants to know is how many people? How many people in the building? You need to have that answer. And you can't know that for sure if you're not having your visitors sign in. Compliance, just to, follow the rules. Denies access, encourages interaction. So again, maybe somebody like an employee, they're on property because they work there. They're supposed to be, but they're trying to access an area that they're not they don't have permission to be in. And part of that procedure to go in that area is to sign in. Well, that's going to perhaps discourage them from trying to go someplace they're not supposed to go if they know they have to sign in. And it does, and that's like right here for 4 and 5, what it's talking about encourages interaction between the guard and that person. So the guard is going to remember, oh yeah, I remember so and so, he came to get into that area when he had to sign in. So just, just a picture, just a visual. Think about school, right? Anybody, parent, family member who comes to pick up their kid, they have to sign in if they're coming inside the building. Any kind of a visitor, so that we always have a count who's there. So security escort, talking about that again, another form of access control. It is a formal policy which requires that all visitors report to the security post and are monitored until being turned over to the responsibility of an employee. In many facilities where security guards act as receptionists, this may be the practice. Additionally, this method allows little freedom of movement by the visitor until responsibility is assumed by the employee. Login procedures. Security personnel must adhere to a strict login policy for a number of reasons, including accountability of staff and visitors. In the event of an emergency, security is aware of all occupied work areas. To comply with the employer or client and security guidelines. It discourages access by unauthorized personnel, and it encourages security employee interaction. Any discrepancies or unusual incidents involving access control must be documented by the security guard. Again, if there is a doubt as to the validity of a request for admittance, access should be denied and supervision should be contacted. Remember, any passes, logbooks, identification cards, etc., are considered official and legal documents. They should be maintained, retained, and secured according to employer-client policy. And we're going to pause part 1 here. Our next section in this unit is talking about threat potential, and I think this is a really interesting area to talk about. So I'm going to end part 1 of Unit 6.